But we might as well just start talking about weed, right? Everybody wants to talk about weed in here. It always gets people to the seats to talk about marijuana. I'm Dr. Polovitz. I am an adult epileptologist, and my epilepsy monitoring unit is at Littleton Adventist Hospital. And I practice down in the south end of town. And like every epileptologist in Colorado, we've also had to become secondary weedologists. So I never was a big botany person, didn't know this would become part of my career. But I'm here to present some data today to talk about marijuana, because it's okay, I like to keep things really casual. If anybody out there has epilepsy, how many of you have been told by friends, family, Facebook people, whatever, they're like, why don't you just do marijuana? Has everybody heard that? Yes, everybody's heard that. And then you're sitting there saying, okay, how, right? We're going to talk about that feeling, all right? And we're going to talk about this being a bit of a conundrum within the scientific community, because scientists, which, you know, most doctors would consider themselves to be, because we have to learn all of the science behind the medications, where the scientific process fails us when it comes to marijuana being legalized and just readily available, and what do we do now, right? Okay, so we're going to talk more about this. Warning, guys. I do, again, when we're talking about scientific data, it gets a little dry. Bear with me. I'll try spice it up and dance around up here and keep you awake, okay? After lunch, not easy to stay awake. If I'm super boring, feel free to take a nap. I take no offense to it. Marijuana has been around for forever. Probably one of our oldest medications. I guarantee there's people in the audience who know a whole bunch more about marijuana than I do. I'm here to just present some basics. So marijuana has been around as long as the human experience has been written down. So on my earlier talk about Epilepsy 101, epilepsy is one of our oldest conditions, and for one of our oldest conditions, we've been using this funky plant. It originated in Asia, and then it came to the United States through many different avenues. One of the main avenues that we've used marijuana in the United States is through Mexican plants. The earliest use that was documented was around 4000 BC, okay? So think about it in context, like Lamictal started in the 1990s, right? This is 6,000 years before that. So marijuana has been around for a long time. What I'm not doing with this lecture today is naysaying marijuana as a medication. My big job is to talk about where research needs to happen and where there are current pitfalls. So we've all heard, I don't know if you guys have heard about these things. There are two different flowering plants, the indica and sativa species. My marijuana enthusiasts that come to see me in clinic tell me indica is good for like a couch lock high, and sativa is more likely to make you have some energy and still be high. These are the things that I'm told about. From what I'm told from individuals who grow marijuana, a lot of these are melded together at this point. Now, the fun part about marijuana that people talk about is a thing called THC. Have you guys heard of that? Okay, THC is the stuff that when you would smoke it in high school, don't look at me like that, you know you did. And so when you did, that's the stuff that makes you high. And then the CBD is the stuff we've all heard about. I even just like went to go get gas this morning and stop in and get a water. And even at my gas station, it said CBD here. I was like, what the heck? So we've all heard about this, right? And if anybody in the audience has epilepsy, you've been told by everybody and your dog to start using CBD because it helps for epilepsy, right? And your dog. I mean, Humphrey told, my dog Humphrey has epilepsy, and he was like, hey, why don't I do CBD? He even told me that. All right. So marijuana products have been used for so many things, not just to have fun and use the funky plant, but rather the different aspects of the plant have been used throughout time for many different reasons. Actually, it makes some pretty incredible and durable paper. The hemp used for like livestock feed throughout the years, clothing, different religious ceremonies, medicine with the hemp oils. And then when we actually look at the flowers and the resin of the plant, sometimes mashed down to make a salve to help with rheumatism throughout the years. nausea, vomiting, pain and fever and inflammation. So when we look throughout historical times, marijuana has been used for many, many, many years for many different purposes. Why do we not know how to use it exactly now? It's because we have not researched it like we do other things. So there were a series of unfortunate things that happened with marijuana to stigmatize it. First of all, there was anti-marijuana propaganda. Now, marijuana is a psychoactive agent. We don't want just everybody using it and then driving and all that kind of stuff. So I get that aspect of it. But unfortunately, some of the propaganda against marijuana led to us not researching it the way it deserves to be researched. Because if we're talking about using something like a medicine, we need to research it like a medicine is researched. So there were anti-marijuana, reefer madness, drug-crazy abandon. I don't know about you guys, but the last time I saw somebody high, they weren't drug-crazy abandoned, they were going night-night on their couch. Like, that's not just, you know, in general, marijuana tends to not make people psychotic, but there was a lot of anti-marijuana propaganda that was used, and that ultimately led to the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. So it was actually available in the United States over the counter in pharmacies prior to that. This tax act took it off the shelves and made it not available for consumption. And then it went a step further in the 1970s. Have you guys heard of the Controlled Substances Act? Well, it was a really good idea, right? To prescribe a medication, if it's something like an opiate, it needs to be a controlled substance and you need to watch out for it, and it needs to be regulated. Well, so within the Controlled Substance Act under Nixon's administration, there were 5 different categories of controlled substances that were made. Category 5 being the least controlled, Category 1 being the most controlled. Marijuana became a Schedule 1 drug. It keeps the same company as LSD, heroin, and ecstasy. And I don't know about you guys, but we all know that marijuana is not as bad for you as heroin, right? Nobody has to even explore the scientific data on marijuana to know it's not as bad for you as heroin. It's not a hard statement to make. By comparison, cocaine is a Schedule 2 drug. Okay, so that's what so you can see where we fell behind when it comes to research. Here's why. Schedule 1 means there's no medical use and high potential for abuse. Schedule 2, we can research. Schedule 1, we cannot. Cocaine was made a Schedule 2 drug because it's one of our earliest anesthesia medicines, and it's still used in different eye testing. And it used to be used like in the battlefield to cauterize wounds if somebody had a bad wound, to stop the bleeding. So what this scheduling did in the 1970s is it made marijuana a naughty drug that we cannot take, or that we cannot study, and said it was worse for you than cocaine. Herein lies the issue when it comes to marijuana and the lack of research. So we have a bunch of people who are thirsty for knowledge. You guys are all amazing for being here. You've had everyone and then some tell you to start using marijuana for epilepsy, and then you're just like you have no idea what to go to, right? No idea how to use it. So it didn't help when, and again, I have no political or any other skew on my talk today. I'm just here to present kind of how it went down in our lovely state. So in August of, what was that year, 2013, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, the medical correspondent for CNN, he started a series called Weed, and he still has that series today. I do believe that this series did a lot of important things about highlighting areas that we need to research further when it comes to marijuana. I, however, don't think it did a great job in what we were talking about, which is now everybody's like, oh, I'm told I'm supposed to use marijuana. How do I use it? And they're asking their doctors, and we don't quite know. So what he highlighted with that first exposure, and it was called Why I Changed My Mind on Weed, he talked about a young lady who's a Coloradan. She has an awful kind of epilepsy called Dravet Syndrome. And do I blame anyone in her family for deciding to do marijuana. I do not even close. And because of their pioneer work, we actually are getting scientific data now. So this took a lot of gusto on their part to say, and gumption to say, I'm not hearing the end of the road is good enough, not for me. This young lady was, when she was a young lady, was cognitively normal and started to have so many seizures that she started to lose her milestones. She was having so many seizures, up to 50 seizures a day. So she was told that it was the end of the road for her options at age 5. So what did her parents say? They said, I don't think so. So what she was started on was a high CBD, low THC strain marijuana. THC, again, being the one that makes you high. And what they started to notice is that the seizures started to decrease. Didn't make her seizure free, but it decreased her seizures, and she started to have milestone improvement. She wasn't so busy having seizures all the time. She started to actually do what you're supposed to do as a little kid. Learn new things, do the things, and have the best life she could. So this was an incredibly important yet anecdotal story. So again, from the scientific community, we love stories, but stories are not science. So we want science. Instead, what happens is cart ahead of the horse here. Everybody's seeing this story. They're like, holy crap, 50 seizures, 2 to 3 a month? Like, that's amazing. I wonder, what should I do for my kid? Or I'm an adult with epilepsy. How much should I take? Because I want to have that outcome too. And unfortunately, the scientific data was lacking because we already went over that, right? It's a Schedule I drug. We can't study it. That's at least until we did gain orphan status with the FDA and actually got to study a now FDA-approved product. So I'm going to go over that data. I like to keep things super casual, so please feel free to ask questions while I go through. Please.
How did they even know to use high doses of CBD and low THC?
Oh, we do?
Yeah, to get it on the recording.
Ugh.
So I'll run around and do that.
Oh, I can, okay, got it.
I'm just curious if you know.
I just asked, how did they know to do that, to actually increase the CBD and lower the THC in order to create Charlotte's Web?
It's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. I know that the original Charlotte's Web that was for this young lady was actually from a marijuana industry or a grow operation in California. And it must have been through, was it through animal studies? So there have been like little tiny pieces of marijuana research in the 1970s. And then it kind of fell to the wayside, and then there must have been, and then in other countries where they don't have the Controlled Substances Act, thank you, Diane, they were able to look at that and extrapolate it. So meaning in the United Kingdom, where they don't have the same regulations that we do, people, and in Israel is a big place where they've studied marijuana for a number of years. So I'm imagining it's that, but I don't know the whole story of the Charlotte's Web origination. It's a good question. Did somebody else had a question, I think. Maybe not. If you remember it, raise your hand again. So what happens? Everybody sees this expose on CNN. Dr. Sanjay Gupta, a very good medical correspondent, says, this is why I changed my mind on weed. So then they come to the place where weed is made legally, which is Colorado. And so Charlotte's Web is a very popular strain here in Colorado. But as the clinician, we're saying, where's the science? How much do I give to my patients? Where's the randomized controlled trial? That's the only way we ever will prescribe a medicine is if we see the scientific data that we need so that we can compare these medicines to each other and more importantly, know they're safe. And so all of a sudden everybody's here, people are operating their lives and we're saying, oh, I don't really know. It's been an interesting experience. So actually right here at Children's Hospital, there was an important study that was done. Now, again, I'm here to present scientific data just to let you know what it's been like on our side of the table, which has been, it's been lacking in scientific data for the random marijuana that's around. So Dr. Knupp, who is one of the main sponsors, and she's our chair of the Professional Advisory Board for the Epilepsy Foundation, awesome pediatric epileptologist. She and Craig Press, who was a resident at that time, and then Dr. Chapman did an important study. They did a study to look at a thing called bias. Have you guys heard of bias before? So in the scientific community, in order for things to be more valid, we want the least amount of bias. Okay, bias can make things not as valid. So they did a study where they looked at anybody who was on oral cannabis agents, who knows what they were, but oral cannabis extracts, any of the patients that were on them. And they looked at one important thing, which is called responder bias. If the family was already living in Colorado versus if the family moved to Colorado, how did they do? Now, these are similar epilepsies, and yet people who had moved to Colorado, who had a lot of motivation to say, this was the cure we were looking for. This was everything I was hoping for and then some. We uprooted not only our child or this adult, but also everybody else in the family and the dog. And we all moved to Colorado. It's going to be worth it. They were more likely to say that they had a response to the oral cannabis. 47% of them said they had a greater than or equal to 50% reduction in seizures. But same people, just so happen to have been living in Colorado, 22%. So over double. So that's what we call responder bias. Do I blame them? No. Were they motivated? Did they try to do something? They saw this expose. Everybody on Facebook is writing them, telling them to move to Colorado. You got to do this stuff. And so they are very motivated for this marijuana to work, for these oral cannabis agents to work. But unfortunately, this is not what we call science in the scientific community. This is community. This is full of bias.
What year was this?
This was back in 2015, I think. They presented it at, oh wait, no, that would have been 2014. They presented it at American Epilepsy Society meeting. So this is, again, all kinds of oral cannabis extracts that were used. But it's just important to know that bias being in any kind of study does not make it as valid. Doesn't mean that marijuana isn't helpful. It just means we need the science, and this science does not make. Okay, no one knows about a medication until it's FDA approved, right? Your doctor is not saying, oh, you know what, Chad, you're gonna go on X4926, it's in study right now, and I'm going to tell you all about it. No, we don't know about drugs until they've been tried, not only through the scientific community, but also then through human studies, and then are available and FDA approved. We don't have them ready. We don't talk about them. We don't tell patients about them. We don't tell them about the side effects till it's readily available. Way over here. Here's where the medicine's available. It has to go through all of this rigmarole to get there. So what did we experience in Colorado with marijuana? We experienced medicine readily available. Whoa, we don't have any of this stuff. Which part works? How do we use it? How much? What are the side effects? Is it broken down by the liver or the kidneys? Does it interact with other medicines? These are the things I would tell patients in my clinic about any medicine we're using because it's FDA approved and I know what they're getting. So now we have a drug that's readily available that completely skipped all these steps. And people are coming into our clinic. I had people fly in from other states asking me, well, what dose should I use? And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm terribly sorry that they spent money to fly out here to ask me that because I'm not going to be able to tell them the answer to that because there isn't an answer. So this has been anti-science. Again, very important that you guys understand I'm not a marijuana naysayer. I already presented. Marijuana has been a very important medication historically throughout the years. What I'm presenting is the conundrum we were faced with all of a sudden, none of these steps being done and marijuana readily available. So it just skipped all of this. So that part's been messy. So what we've been experiencing is that even with your bud tender, that's the people in the dispensaries, they call themselves bud tenders, even with the most well-meaning bud tender, who's an incredible botanist. I mean, some of these people probably have PhDs in botany. It's incredible. They could be the most well-meaning humans alive. But even in the most well-meaning situations, if it's not scientifically and rigorously studied the way that we want, I cannot say that that's okay for you to be taking, because there is indeterminate quality, there is unverified effectiveness. Who knows if that strain, maybe there was weird humidity in Colorado the next month that changed the way the growth condition was. Epilepsy is a complex disease. We need to know the exact same thing is being given every single time. That's why we have good manufacturing practices within the FDA. You have to make that quality for it to be available for human consumption. So now we have drugs that are available, and doctors are saying, I have no idea. Plus, we don't know if it interacts with the medicines already on. Here's another thing, just to throw a wrench into it. In some of those animal studies that Diane was talking about, unfortunately, we saw that even on the same animal, the same kind of epilepsy, so usually a rat-based model, even on that same rat, the same strain, one day THC, the fun marijuana, could be proconvulsant, and the next day it could be anticonvulsant. You know, that data was introduced to us in 2014 at the American Epilepsy Society meeting, because just like you guys, we were all thirsty for knowledge. We all went to all of the meetings to say, well, what the heck are we supposed to tell our patients to do? And so it was important because there was an important group that actually started to look into this stuff for us. And then not only that, took that very important information they were getting out of the UK to get a drug FDA approved here. So I'm going to be presenting that data in a bit. But you can see where it became a bit of a conundrum if you went to Starbuds versus if you went to, what's another one? Other dispensary, which one? The Green Solution? Okay. The what? These are great names. You have to give it to Starbuds. That's brilliant marketing. Anybody who's that marketer, I mean, that's incredible. And so, you know, going from one place to the next, who knows what we're getting? Even again, it can vary widely by the grower, even with the best intentioned growers, even with somebody who knows how to do this, even with botanists. So what has led to this is there are a whole bunch of CBD products. Apparently, even at the gas station this morning after, you know, I filled up my car. But here's the rub. When we're going to actually use something scientifically, we did start to study them. 2015, the FDA looked at 18 supposedly CBD-only containing products. 6 out of 18 didn't even contain it. Okay, and I don't want any angry botanists being like, not my product. I get it, I get it. That's not what I'm saying. Do I know marijuana is going to have so many effects in so many other avenues? Yes. We know it's going to be incredible for pain. It's awesome for Parkinson's tremor. It's good for potentially for migraine and for spasticity and multiple sclerosis and PTSD. Yes, we do know that these things are going to be areas that need to be discovered. Oh, Crohn's disease. That's another huge area that needs to be researched. But what's lacking is that scientific data, like I was talking about here, the drug development, readily available, and now you're telling me 6 out of 18 that said they had CBD in them don't even have that? That I don't like. What's worse is Dr. Google. Do I blame anybody? No, I went to Dr. Google. Patients were asking me, I was like, I don't know. So I actually just was like, well, I'm going to look it up. So I looked up CBD oil, over 1 million results. Thanks, doc. Okay, marijuana for epilepsy, 1.5 million results. Marijuana doses for epilepsy, 330,000 results. You wouldn't get that if you were like Lamictal doses for epilepsy. I mean, that's just not going to happen. So here you are, well-meaning humans. You have epilepsy. You've just learned about this, and everybody and their dog is telling you, okay, well, use marijuana. And you're saying, I don't know how. So you consult Dr. Google. He or she has no help. So what I did is this little dose, the cbdreview.org, and I tried to look up based on my weight, and it was actually completely under the amount that apparently I would need for it to be an effective dose based on what we know with a product that's now FDA approved. Okay, anybody have any questions on that so far? I know it's a lot.
Can I just add this?
Please.
It's kind of interesting, this conversation. My 28-year-old son had severe nausea and vomiting, and he had seizures in his past.
Sure.
Febrile when he was younger. But he started using marijuana, and we secretly did it out. We weren't living in this state for probably 15 years to help him because he was vomiting every morning. It was so bad.
Right.
Losing weight. And he's actually taken himself off of it. He's actually, we moved here 3 years ago. He was able to get medicinal marijuana, chose the doses and whatever types, strains that he wanted to, and took himself off of it 3 months ago because he couldn't breathe anymore. He got to a point where he couldn't exercise or breathe.
Well, and that's the thing is that you bring up a very important point. We know there's medical benefits of marijuana. Nausea. Hello, we've been using it, the chemotherapy stuff, everybody's like, oh, here's your medical marijuana card, go smoke a doobie, and it's gonna help with your nausea, with the chemotherapy, right? Well, yes, but no. It really depends on what you're getting. It really depends on the science, and when the science is lacking, and I've never even heard of that, apparently it caused exercise-induced intolerance and pulmonary issues. We do know that the GI doctors are having their own issue with marijuana and not knowing how to regulate how much people are getting, because there's a thing called cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, which means vomiting due to the cannabis. So we always thought of it, oh, if you're on chemo or if you have nausea, go smoke some weed. But now we're saying if too much weed smoking actually can cause somebody to have the exact opposite effect. We need the research. So again, within the scientific community, there is a consensus that we know marijuana is a medication. We just need the research. All right, so with the last 15 minutes here, let's talk a little bit about the research. Oh wait, first I wanted to show you, if you actually write CBD oil and you try to shop, you can either get the very cheap version of CBD, $14.99 from Stoned, but apparently Dr. Kassaret endorses it. Or you can pay the hefty price for the Charlotte's Web Everyday, or the organic pharmacy. So how do you know which one to take and how much of each one to do, right? But this is available on the web if you write CBD oil. Okay, so now let's actually get into scientific data. There is a company, they're actually here today, that did do the scientific process and got a drug FDA approved, the first CBD oil for any medical purpose approved, and it's approved for epilepsy. Now, is it approved for everybody? It is not. Did they actually do some science? And we appreciate them for it, and there are people benefiting from CBD oil, which again, Charlotte's family experienced and many, many other families experienced, but now we have data to support it. Yes, so we love science if we're gonna use any medication. So in order to do the trial, they needed to first prove that the trial needed to exist. So there was a thing called an open label trial, and that means go ahead and try it. So you had to be off of your marijuana products for at least 6 months beforehand. Colorado did not land any of the study sites, probably not surprising to anybody in the room. We were already doing our kind of science. These were people 1 to 30 years old who had severe, intractable, childhood onset, treatment-resistant epilepsies. I totally support all of these individuals for joining the study because they were at a place where they were told it was end of the road, and they said, I don't think so. So 11 different epilepsy centers throughout the United States, and they weren't taken off their other medicines, and they tried to stabilize the whole situation by making sure that the doses, diet, and their vagus nerve stimulator were at least stable for 4 weeks prior to the study. Because you wanted to show how frequently people were having seizures for 4 weeks before adding a new medicine. Again, science. You want to add in the variables and evaluate whether or not it was effective. So the people who were enrolled had to have 4 or more countable seizures. So you had to actually see their seizures, not just like stare-offs, but actual motor seizures in a 4-week period. And again, here's how we didn't land it. those previously or currently on cannabis therapies were excluded. So that's how Colorado didn't land a study site, because again, the cart was ahead of the horse here. Everybody was already on marijuana products. Again, no blame, because everybody's telling you to do it and it's readily available. So no CBD for 4 weeks, just to see how frequently people are having seizures. And then here is an important thing. This is a FDA-approved, met good manufacturing practices product. So none of that variability I was talking about. And that's why the product is so dang expensive, and these are very expensive studies to do. Trust me, I don't know if, and this is me inflicting my own bias, but I'm pretty sure there were people who didn't want it to get approved. And so it was very rigorously studied. They had these huge safes that, the drug would have to go in, and they were thousands upon thousands of pounds, so much so that like some of the hospitals had to reinforce their floors to even do these studies. So just trust me, these were the most expensive studies. But they did them because we were seeing these anecdotal, these case studies, people saying, it worked for me. And we're saying, where is the science? And now we're getting the science. So there were 214 patients that were enrolled in this initial study. And these were individuals who had very severe epilepsies. There's one, and the organization is here today for Dravet syndrome, just like the little girl Charlotte I told you about. And then also a different syndrome called Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. In epilepsy, we have that whole Lennox-Gastaut syndrome is probably multiple different kinds of epilepsies, and we just group it into one thing. So just know that we're way behind, and we just group it into something called Lennox-Gastaut. But with further genetic stuff, as we get better at epilepsy, it's probably multiple things. Look at how many medications. So very rarely were people on 0. More commonly, they were up to 7 medications people were on. So yes, these people were saying, look, I am not willing to give up. I want to try this. And I heard about this on this expose with Dr. Gupta. I want to know more. So they joined this study. But the medication is broken down by the liver. It's important to take into effect possible things that can happen, drug-drug side effects, or drug-drug interactions and side effects. So hyperammonemia is a thing that can happen. There was only one person who experienced it, and it was because they were on a medication called Depakote at the same time as the CBD oil, and they had what we call hyperammonemia, which is the liver not being happy. 11 people had elevated liver enzymes. So again, like if you start on several of the medicines, your doctor wants to draw blood and check things. It's frequently because the medication's broken down by the liver. No difference here. So again, scientific data, looking at it like a medicine. But people did do quite well. Average change in total seizures, 34.6%. So like all of those studies we were seeing, people saying, I swear this worked for me, and now we're saying, here's some data. 39% had a greater than or equal to 50% reduction in their motor seizures. Again, the countable ones. These aren't the little stare-off ones. With Dravet syndrome, they did outstandingly well. So there's something about this particular part of the CBD oil, this preparation of the CBD oil, that worked particularly well with Dravet syndrome. And so again, no two epilepsies are the same, but there was something about this that worked particularly well for that. And for individuals with Lennox-Gastaut, which we already talked about is probably a whole bunch of different kinds of epilepsy, it worked very well for the drop seizures. So, science. We like that. So 36.8% drop and a 49.8% in those with Dravet syndrome. But this is an open label study, so it's not as rigorously studied, nor would it ever be FDA approved just based on this. These kinds of things are full of different biases and issues with the study design. The gold standard is to do a thing called a randomized controlled trial. Have you guys heard of that before? Like no medication that's out there right now has been approved unless it has had a randomized controlled trial. Because what happens is you actually have a group of people getting placebo, you've heard of that, and then they do what's called double blind. The doctor or whoever is doing this study doesn't know which one you're getting because we don't want to inflict our bias, and you don't know what you're getting because you don't want to inflict your bias. So we already talked about bias stuff, so we want to get rid of that component. So I'm getting some nods. All right, good. So in the open label trial, we did notice that there were some drug interactions, most specifically for your medications that you take for epilepsy, 2 big ones to know. Depakote and Onfi. Those 2 medications are very important to know that they interact with cannabis products and with specifically Epidiolex. Now, if you're somebody who's imbibing and smoking weed all the time and you're on Onfi or Depakote, take caution. There is CBD in the stuff you're smoking, so I want to make sure you know you're probably getting a drug-drug interaction with those. And if you were in my clinic, I'd say, please don't do that till we have more research. Okay. Dravet Syndrome Randomized Controlled Trial. That's what this RCT means. So this was done, same design as before, but now we're doing it versus placebo. Okay? So now some people in the study are getting the placebo drug, and some people in the study are actually getting the drug. And what was seen was very similar to previous from the open label. So 38.9% reduction in seizure frequency. In every trial, there's going to be that thing called the placebo effect. You guys have heard of that, right? When you're getting it, you think it's going to be helpful. That's part of the bias. I would probably be the worst to be in a study because I would think everything was working for me. So that you wouldn't want, I'd have the worst placebo effect. And amazingly, 3 people were super responders, which means they didn't have any seizures. They went seizure-free. Lennox-Gastaut Syndrome, the randomized controlled trial, now as an adult doctor, it actually did cover adults up from 2 to 55 years old. And what we saw with this is the reduction in drop seizures, 43.9%. And what's called the responder rate in all trials, down to 44% reduction. So that was 44% of people had a 50% or greater reduction in their seizures. That's a really good outcome in a clinical trial, to be honest. So what are the side effects, right? If you guys were going to take Tylenol, your doctor would say, okay, careful, you can't take too much Tylenol or it can mess with your liver. Here's what you need to know about Tylenol, right? You can't take it more frequently than this or that. Well, now we have actual CBD oil that's going through the rigorous scientific trials that we thank the families who had these anecdotal stories that got the ball rolling in this regard. And so here are the most common side effects. Somnolence. So somnolence means sleepiness. And in my experience and what we saw in the trials is that was worst for about the first month, but then it started to get better in a lot of individuals. Diarrhea is something to take high into consideration, although I have a lot of patients who welcomed that side effect if they run on the other side of things. And weight loss is one to really consider with Epidiolex. Okay, so now we've got an FDA-approved medication. It's not quite ready for distribution, but we have states that have different laws. So just trust me, I'm presenting all of the obstacles that marijuana has had historically and continues to have. Here's one specifically we ran into in the state of Colorado. We approved recreational marijuana here in Colorado. And with that law, there was a part of it that said pharmacists don't have to disperse any marijuana-containing products. That was part of the law. And so we actually had to add an amendment to that that said outside of those that are FDA approved. So passed our Colorado House of Representatives 9-0. So it went flying through with that. It got FDA approved in June of 2018, met its good manufacturing practices in June of 2018. It got rescheduled instead of being a Schedule I drug. So all of marijuana still hangs out there. Remember, it's naughty like heroin and LSD, but that's where it still is. But this specific drug, Epidiolex, or the CBD oil, this one, specific CBD oil, Epidiolex, now is a Schedule V, which is the least controlled of the controlled substances. And it became available a little over a year ago. So when I have a patient in my clinic who we're going to be using Epidiolex, it's very important that we check their liver tests regularly, that you start at a low dose and make your way up. And there's a maximum dose. Always to consider the drug-drug interactions. If somebody is on Onfi or Depakote, you betcha we're doing some changes to make sure that that's not going to be a problem for them being on both medications. And then there's a little link to their dose calculator they have on there. That dose calculator is specific to Epidiolex, not the random stuff you can get from the dispensaries, just to make sure that you understand that caveat. Or from Dr. Kasserat Stoned. Just kidding. Okay. So my takeaway is that I've lived through this, being on the scientific side of it. It's been a weird experience, I'm not going to lie. I never thought I'd have to learn this much about marijuana in my life. But am I mad about it? I'm not. Because you know what it does? It's gotten people to talk about epilepsy. And you know what? There have not been enough people talking about epilepsy for years upon years upon years. So am I completely mad at marijuana? I'm not. It got us to actually do these FDA-approved trials. It got us CBD oil actually FDA-approved. And because people want it to work, like I showed you on that study that was done here at Children's Hospital, in my opinion, people are more likely to take something if they think it's going to work. So I don't hate that either. So I thank marijuana for getting us to talk about epilepsy, increasing awareness about epilepsy, and hopefully putting more research into epilepsy. Most importantly, someday marijuana needs to not be a Schedule I drug so that we can look at it for all of the different possible medical uses. I already said that. So I already showed this previously, but any questions? Here is my doggy Humphrey. He is 11. He has epilepsy. We adopted him at 5.5. He's kicking some major butt now. And that's his supportive brother, Ernie. And they're out camping. Okay, anybody have any questions? Got one right back there. Actually, if you yell it out, I'll repeat it. Marcy, don't worry about it. Okay. Yes. Yep. Right. I got it, don't worry. Yes. Okay, so the question is, guys, I briefly went over drug-drug interactions. Namely, the two most studied are with Onfi, otherwise known as clobazam, and valproic acid, otherwise known as Depakote. I actually am not familiar on the research with topiramate, Topamax, but so I'll focus in on those two in particular. The CBD oil Epidiolex will interact typically with valproic acid, Depakote, or Onfi, clobazam. And what it can do is it can cause the drug concentrations of those other drugs to go up, specifically with the Onfi. And then very much so with the Depakote, the problems with the liver seem to be a much bigger issue. So to answer your question, I absolutely will manipulate what the person is on if we are going to be adding Epidiolex. If they are on Depakote, it is my desire, if at all possible, to get them on the lowest human doses possible of Depakote or potentially off of it and trade it out. That would be my preference, because we saw in the studies that the liver issues really did seem to increase. But that tends to be dose dependent. So if I can get them on a lower dose of their Depakote, I like that better. With the Onfi, what I'll do is I'll usually start low on the Epidiolex, and I'll bring the Onfi down while I bring this up, so they're kind of like this. Does that make sense? Kind of like if your doctor was going to add lamotrigine and you're already on Depakote. Those two have a very similar drug-drug interaction. The Depakote causes your liver to slow down, and it causes lamotrigine to go way up in the body. And so we know we have to go really slowly up on the lamotrigine, or we could have issues with the liver or a very scary rash that you can have with lamotrigine. So again, scientific stuff like we would normally do. So that's what the company would recommend as well. Oh, you're right here.
Okay, we had a lady from GW that came up to Fort Collins, our support group.
Yeah.
And talked about the Epidiolex or whatever. She said it probably going to cost about $32,000 a year.
Yeah, so, not cheap.
So, you know, we have people that use the you know, like the Charlotte's Web or whatever, and it's, what, $132,
So here, you're bringing up a good question. So here's what I'm saying is, you know, I have nothing to do with how drugs are priced. We already talked about the fact that in order to regulate this very rigorously studied product, it is costly. I'm not the one who does the drug pricing, and that's actually unfortunately comparable to the pricing of other FDA-approved medications. Don't get me into a migraine talking about drugs, okay? But that being the case, I would say don't do something that's not scientifically studied, because then you're just putting, even if it's $132, that's still, $1,000 or over $1,000 a year. That's still money that your doctor doesn't know what you're getting in your body and can interact and will interact with other medications. I agree with you. That's quite a discrepancy. In my experience, though, it would cost several of my patients that were doing various CBD oils that were not FDA approved, several $1,000s a year. Yeah, it just depends on where you go and what you get, which is the problem. And your doctor would say, don't waste your money on it until we've had the research on it.
If you don't have the money, what do you do?
Well, then you can try the FDA-approved stuff, and plus, hopefully with medical insurance, it should not be $32,000 a year. In my experience, my patients have had not a lot of out-of-pocket expense. Unfortunately, it's a very expensive drug, but one of my colleagues speaks, or he is a neuromuscular doctor, and one of his medications is like $750,000 a year. Unfortunately, I know. So unfortunately, this sounds like pennies compared to the way some of our medicines could cost. I don't like that perspective, trust me, I don't like it at all, but I'm just throwing it out there. If your insurance isn't gonna cover it and it's gonna cost that much money, it might not be the right one for you. But the good news is there's other medications that are FDA approved for epilepsy that you do instead of just doing random marijuana. That's my opinion, because then at least we know what you're getting.
Is there a scientific study that says whether CBD versus alcohol, what's easiest on the liver?
Great question. I would say that, excuse my terminology here, but stoners I knew in college would say they know that study. And they would say marijuana is way better for you than alcohol. You know what? I don't know enough about those two in direct comparison. I know that throughout the years we know that alcohol is potentially much more toxic for the liver because we have a lot of data on alcohol on the liver. We know that that is directly liver toxic. But as far as the CBD, I don't know if we have that direct evidence or a comparison.
I have a friend whose family doctor said, I'd much rather you stop alcohol than
Right.
start doing CBD. And I just thought, well, what's the scientific
There isn't.
evidence?
Yeah, there isn't. And that doctors, we're trying to do our best. And I think they're probably correct, to be honest with you, because trust me, as doctors, we've seen lots of problems with alcohol throughout the years. But what I was here to present is the fact that CBD is lacking in scientific data outside of the one product that has actually done the rigorous study to actually get the FDA approval. So now I can only comment on how often it happens with the CBD, the Epidiolex. Go ahead.
Epidiolex, will it be available are they looking into using it for other syndromes? Because
Yes.
my son has Dravet syndrome.
Okay.
And I was wondering about that, and we've been looking at CBD, but very nervous about doing anything like that because
If it's not FDA approved, right? And you're sitting in
consistency.
Right, and you're sitting in a tough situation where everybody's like, but do the marijuana. I know you do, and that's why I bring it up for this talk, so I can say I try to think about what it's like to sit in your seat. And you're hearing it from everybody. Well, just do the marijuana. Just give them marijuana. And you're a loving parent who's like, I'm not going to give them something I don't know what the heck it is. I used to have an attending who used to tell people, you try it first. You try it first and see if it causes any psychoactive effect. I do believe, so there's a thing called an open label extension trial. And so in these trials, they're looking at different kinds of syndromes, but I can't comment specifically on DUCE. So there was a question over here about, are we looking at different kinds of epilepsies? My absolute hope is yes. I do think in the open label extension, there are people with different kinds of epilepsies other than just Dravet and Lennox-Gastaut, but it's only been FDA approved for those two. I will say, and again, this is just from my experience, I do have one adult who doesn't have either of those, and I still tried, and it got approved. I don't know how. Yep, it went through her insurance. So I just, on the little form, I hit other and I clicked other, or I actually wrote other because it's not a click, and wrote down that she had been on 7 different medicines, has a VNS, all of the things, and then
You have to go through that criteria.
I did. I wrote down every single thing this poor woman had ever had. And so,
They have to, so that patient has to go through a particular number of drugs first, before you could possibly.
I would believe that would be the case. Now, that's unfortunately insurer dependent, which is where my migraines come from. Yes. That's my unfortunate boss I never asked for.
Explain just a little bit, I'm sorry, a little more just about the liver, how CBD affects liver, or do you not know? I mean, I love her question about alcohol.
Alcohol versus,
Every single slide you had up said CBD affects the liver.
so the way the body breaks down medications, it has to excrete the medicine in a certain way. So Keppra, we've all heard of Keppra, right? Vitamin Keppra. It's broken down by the liver. It's called the kidneys. It's called renal excretion. So it's renally cleared. Renal means kidneys. Most other anti-seizure medicines are broken down by the liver. So in the same regard, CBD oil, Epidiolex, is broken down by the liver, meaning the liver enzymes have to get revving up to break it down. That's how it filters. But unfortunately, it's not the only thing. Most other medications are broken down by the liver. The liver's busy doing a lot of other things too, like cholesterol and bile production and a whole bunch of stuff.
Well, you just mentioned that it slows down the liver.
Depakote slows down the liver, and the way that so it's not as simple as this drug does this and this one does that. It's how they interact with one another. So there are different enzymes. There's a whole bunch of enzymes within the liver, and some of them, by some drugs, they cause a decrease, and some of them cause an increase in the function. So it's the way it interacts. Unfortunately, it's not as simple as just saying that.
And then what are those 2 tests they do?
So we do what's called a liver function test. The AST, ALT, and bilirubin are the main things that are looked at. You bet. There was one over here, and alkaline phosphatase too. Yes. Wicked amount, okay, but broken down by the kidneys, yes?
That's wonderful. Do you know if marijuana interacts with gabapentin?
Just based on what I know from Epidiolex data, I don't believe it would, because gabapentin is broken down by the kidneys versus Epidiolex, which is broken down by the liver. Yeah, I can't guarantee you that, though. You betcha. I hope you are not on a wicked dose of gabapentin in the future. Yes, Logan.
So would it react in different ways besides just the liver? Like, are you only worried about it reacting with other medication in terms of liver, or are there other parts?
It's a great question. So there were only a couple of people, but one thing that we always check is to make sure people don't get anemias. A lot of times, so Depakote is a big one that can cause anemias and bleeding issues. Only in a very, very small fraction of people on Epidiolex had that, so that's why it's screened as well. I actually will check somebody's complete blood count, so I will check that as well. Yeah. I had one over here. Sorry about that.
So my son takes CBD for his seizures, and he had 9 weeks total on antibiotics prepping for a major.
Oh, goodness. Yeah.
And I saw an increase in his seizures.
Makes sense.
CBD have an interaction with antibiotics?
One would imagine. So first of all, what kind of CBD was he on?
Haley's Hope.
Haley's Hope. So I don't know enough because Haley's Hope is not FDA approved. So I don't know enough about exactly how that product works on the liver, but one would assume it does. And antibiotics, almost every single one of them does. So that makes sense. So something about that drug-drug interaction was causing the effectiveness. So it may have made your son's Haley's Hope get through the body faster, so he didn't have as much medicine around. But I can't say that scientifically. That's the unfortunate part. Oh, 5 minutes. Okay. There was one other question. Oh, here you are. Yes.
So kind of in Douglas County, and right now there's a big hype. Families are running to our school board trying to get CBD oil because it's state approved.
Yes.
In schools, hold it to treat children with epilepsy. Now there are parents with vanilla nasal spray that will stop the seizure. Do you know anything about that?
So of a marijuana,
Yes, it contains THC. It's 5 milligrams of THC and it's
Okay, and again, well-meaning humans, but I have to, as a scientist, heed caution. That makes me very nervous. It makes me very nervous to, well, not only take something that's not FDA approved. I am very nervous about that. I have to be honest with you guys, and that's what I'm here to do. But I also get really nervous about doing it in such a fast-acting way through the nose. There is no scientific data that says marijuana is an abortive medicine for epilepsy. Do I think that will come someday? I hope so. But until that is that, I would not be putting anything that can actually be absorbed that quickly. That's not scientifically proven. That's just messy and potentially harmful, in my opinion. Yes?
So with the Epidiolex, is there THC?
Epidiolex it's less than 0.1% THC, so it's as small amount of THC as you could ever get away from the marijuana product. It is amazing, and that's why, it's so rigorously studied. Okay, guys, I better get ready for the next one. So thank you so much, and I'll be available afterwards, and I appreciate all of you coming in to learn about this.